Hello, I'm Tone Lanzillo, and I'd like to welcome you to Climate-Duluth. Climate-Duluth is a series of conversations with people from Duluth, from our city, who are concerned about the environment and climate change. And I'm very happy for our first show to have with us Bret Pence, who's with Minnesota Interfaith Power and Light. Welcome, Bret.
Thanks, Tone.
Maybe if we could start, if you could just tell us a little bit about the organization and your role with them.
Sure. Minnesota Interfaith Power and Light, or MN IPL, we're a state affiliate of a national nonprofit. The national one is Interfaith Power and Light, and we are a 501c3, so we're a standard nonprofit. We are a faith-based nonprofit, but we're really focused on the issue of sustainability and in particular climate change. Mm-hmm. So our mission is to lift the voice of faith within discussions of climate change and the solutions for climate change. We don't think that we can do this without faith. Science can tell us the what, why things are happening,
right,
but it can't tell us how we're feeling. It can't tell us why we should care about that, or the moral mission of people to do right by others.
Gotcha.
So that's part of what we do. The other part of what really our mission is to provide action pathways. So that means if a faith community or a broader community where a faith community lives wants to take action on climate, we should try to help them with that. Okay. So those are kind of where we live and operate in terms of our mission.
Okay, and your position and role is what with the organization?
I'm the Northern Minnesota director, so that means I'm the lone staff person.
Okay.
up in, and I live in Duluth, and we have an office in Duluth in Gloria Day Church, who are wonderful partners with us. But our main office is in the Twin Cities, so okay. My focus is up in northern Minnesota.
Wow, and I guess as the only paid staff person, a lot of volunteers support, or?
Well, you couldn't do it. You couldn't do it without a super talented group of volunteer leaders all over northern Minnesota that I'm the head cheerleader for, okay. Basically. And my main job is really coordinating and lifting up those folks that are doing this work, and then trying to provide some structure and focus as well to some of that. So.
Cool. At this point, what are some of your priorities or the focus of your work with Minnesota Interfaith Power and Light at this time?
Yeah. Well, we have a theory of action, and it's called a three-legged stool of action. That means you have to do each one of those legs of the stool to have a really good outcome. And so we always look at things from that perspective. So those three legs would be the practical side. So in our case, it would be, helping people with practical projects. So that could be energy efficiency in a church. It could be how to go solar, in a community, maybe a solar group buy like we've done in the last year here in Duluth. So I think that speaks for itself. Another leg is called the systemic side. So that's policy. Oftentimes that can be related to policy. Okay. So that's recognizing you can't just take individual actions. You also need a system that's actually allowing those actions to take place and making, engendering them to go forward and to do more. So we're active on the policy front. We advocate at the state level and at the local level, like at city government, and even at our Public Utilities Commission for climate, actions. Mm-hmm. And then the third leg is the one that's, we call it the spiritual side. I would say it's also the relational side. And that just stems from the fact that you can't do any of that without personal relationships, okay. Without a moral center.
Right.
And so that could be anything from helping a church develop a green team but it also can be having a study group or supporting a study group. It can be supporting a climate march and working with other organizations on that. So I always operate in that kind of system. So
okay.
It's fun because you get to do a whole lot of different things.
Right.
But really I think my particular role up here is, as I kind of mentioned before, is kind of head networker, because there's so much that's happening here, and for any of that action to take place, you need a strong foundation for that stool.
Right.
And that's really people supporting each other. So I do a lot of traveling. I go over to the Iron Range, Grand Rapids, sometimes Bemidji, sometimes up the shore, but of course a lot here in the Duluth Superior metro area. And a lot of it's talking to people, coordinating people that are already doing these actions and getting them to connect with other folks, and then focusing on larger issues. So I see that as my main job, and process is so important.
Okay. Yeah.
Process is as important as the end goal. How you do something here, how you relate to people, how you appreciate and work with people is as important as the main goal.
Right.
We can't get to a healthy climate without a healthy community, really.
Makes a lot of sense.
Yes.
Where did your interest, or where did you begin working in environment and climate change prior to where you are now?
Yeah, that's a long story, but when I graduated from college in 1992. I was a history major with a science minor, and my senior thesis was on Chinese military strategy from like 1925 to 1941.
Okay.
Right? So I was on track to be an academic, really. At least that was in my mind, but in my heart I wasn't. What happened is I went to teach English in Taiwan immediately after school. And as a way to think about, okay, do I want to pursue like becoming a professor in like Chinese history or things like that? And so I lived in Taiwan. It was a wonderful experience, but one of the big things I took away from that was just how what we were doing to our environment. At that time, Taiwan was sort of one of the industrial powerhouses for the world. It's since moved to the People's Republic of China, in that time period. But when I lived in Taichung, which is the central city and kind of central part of Taiwan, you couldn't. I was a person that had grown up partially on a farm that loved exercising and being outside, and then I come to this environment where just walking to work would be the equivalent of smoking 4 packs of cigarettes, and you would cough, and working out became a danger, to be outside, and so it really made me, when I came back from that, think about, wow, this is happening. And I had a previous experience where I had traveled around the world on a program called Semester at Sea.
Okay.
And I had seen also within that context environmental degradation in all kinds of places and people being negatively impacted by that.
Right.
So when I came back from that, I really took that to heart. I didn't know how much I had taken it to heart, maybe until a few years later. I still was thinking I was going to be on an academic track, but I really was affected by that. And since that time, environmental issues have just played a huge role in my life. I later on became a wilderness guide, and that's a broad description for a job title, but doing a lot of different things outside for a profession for 10 years. And I just grew to, I'd always had a love of the outdoors, but I grew to really, really love it. And that was part of what really motivates me to keep going.
That's interesting. When you step back and look at Duluth at this point, what do you think are some of the major issues or challenges facing Duluth when it comes to the environment and climate change?
Well, there are a lot of issues. I think we've seen them. I don't think it's any secret to people if you've lived here over the last 10 years. If you were here in 2012, you experienced a monster flood that instead of a 1,000-year event, we are now building our systems to be ready for that kind of event again soon. Not in 1,000 years, but within the next 20 or 30. So we really, and again, our lake walk is another view where we have more rain events where the lake is much higher than it's been in a long, long time. And because of that, and because we're getting wave action in the fall and the spring typically from big storms, and we're not as much ice in the spring to keep that down, our lake walk's being degraded. So our city is constantly, looking for funding for that. I know in the bonding session we'll probably be asking for more from the state on that. So I think most people in Duluth can see that. Another challenge for Duluth related to climate is emerald ash borer. The city is having to deal with its ash trees all over the city failing, but it's the ash trees you don't see that are in with all of our 10,000 acres of forest within city limits.
Okay.
The black ash is a tree of the swamp, so we're losing those trees. So Duluth is dealing with, this is not a future issue. We're dealing with the effects of climate change right now. That emerald ash borer is here because it's warmer in the winter.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard to get a Duluthian to be upset about being warmer in the winter. But if you realize your trees are going away and your power lines are being dropped because trees are falling on lines, you realize the scope of the issue. So we are really dealing with climate change as a present situation here in Duluth. And the nice thing about working and living in Duluth is I think a lot of people understand that. Those are just 3 examples, but I don't think anyone in Duluth would really say that I'm too far out in those suppositions. So,
wow. As far as city government, mayor, city council, county commissioners, what is your hope as far as in the near future, as far as things you'd like to see them work on?
mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I think one thing to recognize is that Duluth really is leading, so we should recognize what we've been doing first.
Okay.
So I think on the positive side, Duluth, back in I believe the early 2000s, the city council, recognized the Kyoto Protocol, one of the early climate
Yes.
recognitions of climate, and they've done I think after that time did a couple of carbon inventories to see where the city was creating carbon emissions and then some steps about how to reduce them.
Okay.
I think in the last 5 years in particular, the city has really focused on decreasing its own emissions. We have a mayor, Mayor Emily Larson, who's really made this a plank of her administration. When the federal government pulled out of the Paris Climate Accords, she was one of the first to say Duluth is not going to be pulling out of that.
Yes.
We're still in,
Right.
along with other cities in Minnesota. So she's been a real leader in making sure that we are in the head of that. We've done a ton with energy efficiency that most people don't know of in this town, but all of our little street lights that are city owned, you may see that they don't have that orange hue anymore. They have kind of a bluish hue. There's some people might be upset about the lights and about the color of the lights, but the reality is no one can say that they're using they're using a lot less energy, and it's saving ratepayers, taxpayers in our case, a lot of money to do that, and it's reducing our electricity use a lot, which is heavily coal-based still.
Mm-hmm.
So, and we bought into one of the first solar garden in the area. The city has bought into that, saving a lot of money by doing so. We've really, the last thing I should say is, I almost forgot, we've really taken a lead on trying to convert our steam plant. We have 2 utilities. We have Comfort Systems, which runs our water and gas, and then we have the Duluth Energy Systems downtown, which is the old steam plant. And they've been really moving forward on decarbonizing that. So all those streets that have been torn up in our town, if you live here, that's been one of our banes of our existence the last couple of years. But part of what's been happening is they've been replacing the steam lines as they've been replacing the streets down on Superior, and they're making that a hot water closed loop rather than a steam open loop. So it's way more efficient, and that enables them to really look at other sources of heating rather than coal, which is that was almost entirely a coal-based system just a few years ago. Now they're using natural gas and hoping to move to a wood oil product very soon.
Okay.
And that plant is almost 75% or more of the corporate city's emissions of carbon.
Oh, wow.
So we've really been doing a lot. So I think it's important to recognize that we've really been leading in a lot of ways in this city, and people should take pride in that.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a lot more to do, and every city has that challenge. There's a lot more for all of us to do in the country, in the world, and in individual cities. I think what I'd like to make sure as we go forward and continue to address climate change and carbon reduction actions here is that people aren't left behind. In Duluth, we have about 25% of the population living under the poverty limit,
Right.
and we have 5% unemployment. that tells me there's a ton of people that are just working and trying to get by.
Right.
And there's just a lot of people hurting in general.
Right.
And as we move forward with these systems, we just need to make sure that those people that have the least are being addressed, and we try to give them the most to help them out. I mean, that's what my faith tells me to do.
That's a good point.
And I think many other faith traditions also have that social justice component. Sometimes that's called climate justice.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something we're really also very focused on, the social justice component. So for instance, we have a gas utility here. I'd like to see us consider having a low income program within that so that we can start to insulate, homes of those less fortunate, so that
Right.
they're not facing a situation in the winter where they have to turn down the heat so they can eat.
Okay.
When you go into a home that's really cold and dark, it affects you immediately because you can see people are just trying to survive. So if we can help them a little bit and put more money in their pockets so that they can live a better life, it's going to help us all. It's going to help the climate as
Right.
well.
Right. I was just thinking, you were mentioning some of the positive things the city government's doing. In the past few years, what have you seen in the community at large that's maybe given you some hope? Some things that you've seen recently happen? And I know we've talked about a few of those before, but yeah, what would be a couple you would share?
Yeah, well, I think I mentioned all the stuff that's been happening within city government,
Right.
and I think that's wonderful and should be celebrated. I think, from my own standpoint, we just came off a month of climate action, basically September and kind of into October has been a month of climate action, really centered around Greta Thunberg's trip to New York
Mm-hmm.
and her climate strike on September 20th. I remember when we first did I think we did a climate hike in Duluth instead of a climate strike. And we had 50 or 60 people
Okay.
show up, and we did a hike kind of by the Munger, right by the zoo, and hiked up a trail and looked at some of the damage from the 2012 flood.
Oh, okay.
We were thrilled to get 50 or 60 or however many people we got come to that event.
Right.
Now, the issue is, well, how can I fit so many events on how can I get to 3 events that are happening at once?
Right.
And when I get there, where am I going to park even my bike? Where am I going to put my bike? So there's just a tremendous ferment right now. I think there's a tremendous recognition. As I said, it's easy in Duluth, I think, to see that we're living through effects of climate change.
Right.
But I think other people in the country and in the world are also understanding that now. Hey, this is a big issue. We've got to wrap our hands around it now, so that it's not even worse down the line.
Okay.
So I think that's the biggest thing I take away is people are really engaged on this issue in a way I haven't seen in my lifetime.
Okay.
So,
Wow.
yeah.
One question I love to ask people is, where do you get your news and information about the weather and climate change? Yeah.
Well, I try to read broadly.
Okay.
I'm a big reader.
Okay.
My mother was a librarian. My father a history teacher.
Oh, wow.
My
Okay.
mother also an English teacher. So books and the printed word is something I try to read broadly. But I also I get a feed from Energy News Network.
Okay.
And that's a free feed that you can get in. Anyone can kind of subscribe to, and I highly recommend it. It's focused on energy primarily, but it has a lot of kind of links and also specific sections on climate change.
Okay.
And it's every morning I get a feed. What's happening in the Midwest, and it's all the different news articles that have come out around the country about energy and climate issues.
Okay.
And then I also get a feed on just the United States. And so this is a whole feed I get, and they're all links to all the different articles and about what they are. It's a really wonderful resource. So I read that. I try to just peruse it, and then I'll dive in on specific articles of interest, of climate and energy interest.
Right.
I try to do it every weekday for sure.
Okay.
As just part of myself keeping up on the issues and news, so that part of my job is I have to explain myself. I have to explain why we should be concerned about a certain issue.
Okay.
Like a gas plant over in Superior is one thing that we're kind of opposed to right now.
Right.
And I need to explain myself. People have the right to ask, well, why would you be opposed to that? And so I need to tell them, hey, did you know that natural gas is sure, the emissions are less from natural gas in terms of when you burn it, but in terms of the extraction and distribution, getting it to you, there's a lot of methane that is produced. And so much methane now that we think that natural gas could be as dirty as coal.
Oh, okay.
In terms of its climate impact. And I need to keep learning as part of my job and trying to help people out. So that's one of the ways I do it.
That's great. Something I think I'm going to ask all my guests in the future is, in your personal life, what kinds of things have you tried to either change or transform in response to climate change in the past, say, few years?
Oh boy, I try and do something I try and make a goal every year.
Oh, okay.
And I try and drag my family along into that goal, Okay. Sometimes successfully, sometimes not. I have 2 boys, Colin and Davey. They are 14 and Davey soon to be 11. So it's been fun. I rode an electric bike here. One year I decided I was going to do that just to really commit to bike riding more. And at the time I was having health issues, so just regularly riding my bike wasn't as much of an issue at that point.
Right.
That's been a godsend. So that's one thing. One thing I've done the last 2 years is really use a carbon calculator. And so I'd encourage everyone to use Cool Climate. You just type in Cool Climate on a Google search.
Okay.
And that's a carbon calculator put out by Berkeley. And then with a lot of other partners, private and non-governmental organizations. But it's a good way to really dive into, okay, how much am I using for carbon right now?
Right.
Where am I using it? And what are my choices to reduce it? And I found that a really fun tool. Again, it was me trying to get information of how to use it so I could talk to other people about it.
Right.
But as I did that, I thought, oh, this is a really great tool. Last year I looked at doing some things and I was able to compare how would just cutting my highway speed down from 70 to 65 compared to like getting a new dehumidifier in my house.
Okay.
And that would give me the carbon impact of that. And guess what? Maybe not free, you have a little bit of time involved.
Right.
But the cutting back 5 miles an hour was a really big carbon impact.
Wow.
That I could make for no cost, and in fact make money on because I'm getting much better gas mileage by doing that.
Right.
Then the $2,000 this super dehumidifier is getting in lieu of a kind of a air conditioning and air purifying system. So we'll probably still do the dehumidifier at some point because it has other impacts other than energy. But that was very helpful to me. So I encourage everyone to try that.
Okay.
It's fun.
Yeah.
And if you're a data geek like me, it's just fun.
And I must ask, because I hear a lot about it, this unique bike you have. Can you tell us about this bike you have?
Oh yes, it is. It is a privilege, and it's a cargo bike. So it's kind of like the F-150 of bikes.
Oh.
But when I call it the F-150 of bikes, it probably sounds a bit too masculine. My wife says I look like Mary Poppins on it. So maybe it's just me projecting in terms of the F-150 status. Right. But it's a bike built to hold weight, basically. So it's a long bike.
Okay.
It has a basket on the front, but the basket's anchored by a rack that's really built right into the frame instead of just an add-on. And then the back of the bike also can carry a large load, or I've set it up so that I can carry my kids on it too, so I can pick them up from school or drop them off, get groceries with it and stuff like that. So I really try and use that. People see me you'll probably see me biking around town. It's a large green bike, and it has biking usually 16 or 18 miles an hour, which is a little faster.
Okay.
If I'm on the road and you see me, I'll be biking that fast. So you can honk and say hi. But it is really fun. I'll tell you the one thing that I never. So I bike about when not in the snow. I don't bike in the ice. So that's pretty much April through the end of October. Mid-April to the end of October, I'm using it. I bike about 700 miles.
Oh wow. And
I get so energized by doing that. I don't need coffee in the morning if I'm biking in.
Okay.
You talk to people. This morning when I biked in, I was waiting at a light, and the gentleman said, "Is that a motor?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "That's good for you, man. Keep it up." So I get to meet people. You don't get that in a car, right? So I really enjoy it. It's one of my real privileges, I think, is to be able to kind of ride that around and use that and then talk to people about it.
Wow.
It's fun.
That's cool. Looking forward over the fall and winter, what are some of the things that you'll be working on with Minnesota Interfaith Power and Light? Anything specific coming up for you all?
Yeah, we always have events. We'll probably be doing another solar group buy. That's where you talk to people about solar, but then you work with typically a single solar contractor, and people there, after you've done the outreach and education, you walk people through the process, and if people are interested in getting solar on their own roof, you do it together as a group through that single installer.
Gotcha.
So that's the same as a bulk buy at a grocery store or anything else. By buying in quantity, you're reducing the cost for everyone, right?
Okay.
So we did that last year. We had 6 homes that did that. We had some pretty good success with it in terms of feedback that we're getting from folks on that. I'm still looking at some of the data from that about how we change that.
Okay.
But that's one thing we'll be doing. So people could email me directly at, you'll see my contact information at MNIPL.org
Okay.
if they're interested in that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what, like on the practical side.
Okay. Bret, I really want to thank you for
Yeah.
being with us in the first show. This has really been great,
Yeah.
and learned a lot more about you that I didn't know.
Yeah, thank you. too.
Yeah. I'd like to close the first show with a quote, and it's from Rollo May, who's the author of The Courage to Create. And he wrote, "A choice confronts us. Shall we, as we feel our foundation shaking, withdraw in anxiety and panic? Frightened by the loss of our familiar mooring places, shall we become paralyzed and cover our inaction with apathy? If we do those things, we will have surrendered our chance to participate in the forming of the future. We will have forfeited the distinctive characteristic of human beings, namely to influence our evolution through our own awareness. We will have capitulated to the blind juggernaut of history and lost the chance to mold the future into a society more equitable and humane. Or shall we seize the courage necessary to preserve our sensitivity, awareness, and responsibility in the face of radical change? Shall we consciously participate, on however small the scale, in the forming of the new society? I hope our choice will be the latter." So I would like to thank you all for joining us for the first show of Climate Duluth, and we look forward for all of you to join us in future episodes. Take care.